quick point. This will be a shorter shiur than normal because really what I want to look at is this final point about what is it that we're doing today? How do we deal with Tefillah today, given what we've discussed up until now, right? And so we're going to look at that. It's not going to be an hour, right? It's probably going to be maybe half hour, 40 minutes that we're going to look at that. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards if anybody has any, but I know that we have like a limited tzibur, right? And many people are listening to the recordings. But I want to also consider what are the implications, right, of the situation that we have today. So just to kind of recap.
No.
Yeah. To kind of like bring a summary to what it is that we've addressed up until now. So we've addressed, and it's very brief, right? We've recognized that tefillah is essentially in the mind. And that is expressed by the word tefillah itself, which we said the root of the word is palal, right? And palal means to contemplate, to imagine, to be able to have a sense of conscious awareness. And we looked at the pasuk of Yaakov Abinu when he sees Yosef, his son, again, he says, Re'o fanecha lo filalti. I did not imagine, I did not meditate on what it would be to see your face again because I thought you were dead. So that filalti, falal, is the word of tefillah. And tefillah is pronounced that way with a dagesh and a lamed because it really should be tefillah with two lameds. We drop one lamed and we put a dagesh and a lamed to show that it should be two, but we drop one to make it easier to say. So tefillah is that, the tefillin, right? Tefillin, one tefillah, two tefillin. Tefillin, tefillah shel rosh, tefillah shel yad, are things that help us with stimulus to be able to have consciousness in our hearts, our minds, to being able to pray with Takadosh Baruch Hu. One can ask, what about the women? Well, first of all, it's not clear that women are not allowed to wear tefillah, tefillin, but we don't do it, right? It's not something we practice, and that's because the men, for the majority of the time, had to do this often. The women are only obligated to pray from the Torah once in the day. Men are obligated from the Hachamim to pray 3 times during the day. And so there was this encouragement for them to be able to have this conscious awareness all the time. Although it's important to recognize that the tefillin were not established as prayer items per se. They were meant to be worn all day, right? This is what the person is supposed to be able to have in mind. But at the time of tefillah, the point is that we bring our mind and our awareness and consciousness to God, right? To Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that we do not get distracted. So we also spoke about koved rosh last time, and kalut rosh. Koved rosh is a weight of mind, a weight of thought, meaning that it is weighted down. It's not light and flies away like leaves with the slightest wind, that it has a weight and stating a seatedness to it, right? It's not easily moved. And the Hachamim we saw said, En omdim litpalel ela mitoch koved rosh, that we only get up to pray with a weighted mind, with a mind that is clear and focused and not easily pushed and distracted to other things. We do not get up out of kalut rosh. We don't get up out of a distracted mind. The mind must be settled. And we saw from that halacha, right? That Harambam posek halacha that kol tefilah she'en ba kavana ena tefilah. That any tefillah that does not have kavanah is not really a tefillah. It looks like tefillah, it feels like tefillah, it sounds like tefillah, but it is not tefillah. And why is it not tefillah? Because the mind is not focused, it is not aimed at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is not conscious and clear to that. We looked at what is it a person supposed to do in terms of being able to aim one's mind. We saw the Hasidim Rishonim used to spend an hour before tefillah preparing their mind to be able to get into the right state of mind. And Harambam writes le'alacha that appropriately it's right for us to do that, maybe not for an hour, but to clear our mind. He says, Ketzad kavanah. How do we do the kavanah? We pause, we clear our mind, we then focus to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we don't do that, we have to repeat the tefillah. Went so far as to say that if my mind is not settled, if I've been traveling 3 days, I should take before I actually am ready to pray again, and that my mind is ready to be able to be focused. So all of this, right, is a recap, right? We're summarizing, excuse me, what what Tefilah is meant to be, how it is that we're meant to approach it, and we recognize very clearly that all of it has to do with consciousness, being able to focus our mind appropriately, to stand before Hakadosh Baruch Hu, before the Shekhinah, and to share a space with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Because we also said that the connection between us and Hakadosh Baruch Hu is through our mind. That's what we share with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And we saw that all the way back to Gan Eden. If you recall, we looked at Adam Arishon, that there was no rain, and that Hakadosh Baruch Hu needed consciousness of a human being in order to be able lehakir b'tovatan shel geshamim, to recognize the value of rain. So I'm just saying all of that in order to be able to kind of bring our consciousness back, right? So we have our minds back to the environment of Tefillah and what it's supposed to be. And that Harambam was posek, that if we do not have kavanah, asur litpalel, it's prohibited to pray. Yeah. So of course the question that we are left with then is, well, what are we doing today then? Based on everything that we've said up until now, we shouldn't be praying unless we're ready to pray. Not only we shouldn't, it's prohibited, it seems, to pray until we're ready to pray. So how is it that we have these daily minyanim, people coming to shul, to Bet Knesset, every single day, 3 times a day, no matter where their mind is, they get up, they say their Amidah, they say the words, they bow, they do all of these things. What happened to everything that I've expressed, and mentioned, that is not my thoughts? It's halakha mefureshet, right? It's something that's very clear in the halakha. What are we doing today? So I want to show you what we're doing today, right? In other words, where what we do today comes from. And so I'm going to show you the Tur in the Shulchan Aruch, right? We'll address this, and we'll have a look at this inside. I'll share my screen with you. We can read it together, and we'll begin to have a better understanding of why we're doing what it is that we're doing today, and on what authority. So this is the Tur Siman Tzadichet in Orach Hayim. And he says, at the beginning, it seems to be very familiar, right? It seems to be pretty much in line with everything that we've said. He says, Hasidim ve'anshe ma'aseh שהיו מתבודדים מכוונים בתפילתן עד שיהיו מגיעים להתפשטות הגשמיות ולהתגברות רוח השכלית. He says the Hasidim and people that were very careful about what they did, it's Anshe Maaseh, they were very careful in their practice. In their prayer, when they would really allow for themselves to pray and they let their mind be able to really focus on standing in front of the Shekhinah, it would get to a point in where their consciousness was all-consuming. Hitpashtut gashmiyut means that they would drop their physicality, which means that they were not distracted by their physical existence. They were able to get to a point of mind and where their consciousness was governing, was basically controlling everything around them. They were in full awareness. To the point that they would get close to the level of prophecy. Now, if you remember last time I said that Tefilah really, in its proper sense, is prophecy in the other direction, right? In other words, if prophecy is HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicating with us, bridging the gap between him all the way in his place, whatever that is, right, into our physical existence, Tefilah is the opposite. Tefilah is us reaching out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our mind to be able to connect to him. So they say that's what Tefilah ended up being. If a person was really immersed in Tefilah appropriately, it's as though they would get to the level of prophecy. What does that mean? Im tavolo machshava acheret betoch Tefilah, if there would be a distraction, another thought, other than what this person was focused on and speaking to with regards to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his prayer, he or she, right, was able to control that thought and do what? Yishtok ad shetitbatel hamachshava. He would pause, quiet, until that thought passed. And that, by the way, I'm going to just pause here for a minute because it's very important to recognize. We relate to thoughts as though they are these overwhelming concrete things. And the reality is that thoughts come and go in our minds all the time. And a very good practice for somebody who wants to begin to prepare for Tefillah is just simply to take 5 minutes and just observe the thoughts that pass through your mind in 5 minutes. Not to think about anything intentional. Just let your mind be. Because there's always what we call in English meta-consciousness. What is meta-consciousness? It's the part of your mind that thinks about what you think about, right? So if you're thinking about something and then you think, oh, it's interesting that I thought about that, that is what we call meta-consciousness. You as a human being can be aware that you're aware, right? You know that you know. And that knowing that you know is meta-consciousness. It is an overarching consciousness that watches and is aware of the thinking that goes on in our brain. So a good practice to begin to prepare for Tefillah, I mean, over a lot of days, a lot of maybe even years, is to take 5 minutes every day, every other day, and just begin to pay attention to the thoughts that come into your mind and out of your mind. Just pay attention to them. Because what that will do is it will allow you not to completely identify with the thought. You realize that thought is just a thought. Your mind that is aware of the thought, that's really where you are. But the thoughts come and the thoughts go. So the more that you become very sensitive to the fact that thoughts come and thoughts go, and they do not define you, and they do not control you, you are better able to do what he just said. And that is that the Hasidim and Anshe Ma'aseh would get to such a level of conscious strength that im tavolo machshava acheret, that if they had some other thought that would come into their mind, betoch tefillah, in the middle of their prayer, yishtok ad shititbatel machshava. They would just be silent. They would stop their prayer until that thought left. Notice it doesn't say that they would try and remove the thought. Notice it doesn't say that they would try and control the thought. It says they would just be silent until the machshava titbatel, until the machshava nullified, went away. Yeah? Well, very important. Then he continues, he says, V'lo yitpalel lo b'makom sheyesh bo davar shemevatel kavanato. Now, of course, if a person is praying in a very calm, quiet place and a distracting thought comes in, well, you've got to figure out what to do with that distracting thought. That happens all the time. But it almost goes without saying that you certainly shouldn't pray in a place that is itself distracting. Right? Could be that there's all kinds of things in the environment that are distracting. Don't pray there, because it's going to be that much more difficult to maintain focus of mind. So you don't pray b'makom sheyesh bo davar shemevatel kavanato. You don't pray in a place and where there is something that causes your mind to lose kavanah. V'lo b'sha'ah shemevatelet kavanato. Also, the time that you pray has to be one in which you are not losing your kavanah. Which means, are you more stressed? Are you more concerned? Are you more preoccupied with your thinking? Choose the right time to pray. Choose the right place to pray. So, okay, all of this is only enhancing what we've said so far, right? Obviously, when that is what? That tefillah is mind-oriented, and it requires a well-seated, focused mind, and that distractions need to be dealt with so that they do not move a person away from the kavanah of their tefillah. So he brings examples of this amongst the hachamim of the Talmud. And he says, "De Amar Bihya bar Isheh, Amar Rab, Kol she'en da'ato miyushevet alav al yitpalel." Says in the Gemara that any person's mind that is not seated, yoshev is to sit, right? So his mind is not yoshevet alav. His mind is not well seated and focused, settled. Al yitpalel, should not pray. Another point, Rabbi Hanina beyoma. It says, Rabbi Hanina beyoma. Oh, sorry, I've been having a bit of trouble with my lights lately. Rabbi Hanina b'yoma deratah. Rabbi Yonah, in a day that he would get angry, it says, look at that a little bit. I don't know that helps. Actually, in a day that he would get angry, he would not pray. So it's perush b'yom shaya ko'es. If he got angry one day, lo haya matzleh, he wouldn't pray that whole day. Why? Because he'd be concerned that his mind was still occupied in the angry thing that occurred to him. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer said, Haba min haderech al yitpalel toch shelosha yamim. Rabbi Eliezer said, if a person is traveling, he shouldn't pray within 3 days of traveling, which we saw in Harambam. Harambam was posek halacha. Hold on, I'm just going to tell the guys to see if they can turn on the light. Yeah, I apologize. Okay. So, so if you came back from a journey, 3 days. Rabbi Eliezer ben Osher Rabbi Yosef Gili Omer Afem Metzer. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef Gili, said even if a person is just concerned about something, nervous about something, don't pray until you're able to find some state of mind that's calm. And then you can pray about what you were nervous about, but not in the state of nervousness. Okay? Shmuel wouldn't pray in a house that had whiskey or that had any kind of, a strong drink in it, because it would be, the smell would be very strong. It would distract him, and so on and so forth. Right? So it's both the things, the environment, the smells, the sounds, and so on and so forth. Don't pray in a place distracting. So everything that we've read up until now, again, is completely in line with what it is we've said up until now. And then comes this line, which changes everything. And that is, V'katav Haram Rothenburg, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, right? It was in Germany. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg was the teacher of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. And he said, En anu nizharin ata bechol zeh. He says, today we are not careful with any of this. She'en anu mechavnim kol kach b'tefilah. Why? Because we just don't pay attention in our prayers anymore. So shocking. Look, in one line, everything that we did for the last 2 shiurim was thrown out. Because what he's saying, and now he didn't throw it out. In other words, what he was saying was that up until that point, I'm going to come back to this, but up until that point, people were, in his day, right, and this is going back 500 years more, right? In his day, people were no longer really praying this way. What were they doing? They were saying the words, similar to what we do. So what did Maharam Rothenberg do with that? What Maharam Rothenberg did was he said, and it's okay. Now that's a huge issue. Why is it okay? How is it possible to say that it's okay? Now, I want to be clear, and this is very, very, very important. Maharam Rothenberg is not saying that now Tefillah has been redefined. He's not saying that today we're not careful with all of this, and therefore Tefillah is no longer something that requires a mind, but just to say the words. He's not saying that. All the Maharam Rothenberg is saying is it's not prohibited to say the words of Tefillah if a person's mind is not focused. Now that's a pretty big thing, right? I'm not saying that's all he's saying. It's a huge thing, but that's what he's saying. He's saying it's not an isur to say the prayer's words as though you're praying if your mind is not focused. But he is not saying that we are now redefining what tefillah is. He cannot do that. Nobody can do that, right? So what the Maharam Rottenberg essentially said is that we allow today people to go through the motion of Tefillah even though they're not praying, which was prohibited before. They weren't allowed to do that before. You were not allowed to go through the motions if you were not really praying. Yeah? One second. It's concerned. I'm sorry for the pause. Let's see what's going on here. Can you just look at your text? Can you look at the text? I'm in the middle of shiur. Thanks. And that's very important. So the question is, why would he do that? And not just him, why would it be accepted? One of the reasons why it would be accepted is because if he did not do that, nobody would pray anymore. And so this was a very difficult question that had to be dealt with by the Hachamim. And what they came to decide was, on the one hand, if we keep the halacha exactly as it is, the way that the Talmud and the Harambam express it, and people are not allowed to pray if they don't have kavanah, and as the Maharam Rottenberg says, people are not mechavin their tefillah so much anymore, well, then what would happen? Well, people just wouldn't pray. And if people wouldn't pray, we would lose tefillah altogether. That's what Maharam Rottenberg is saying. And so he's saying that we had to either choose one of two things, either not to have tefillah, and only certain people that have kavanah are able to say tefillah, but at least it would keep tefillah what it is, or we include more people in trying to go through the motions of prayer so that the whole thing of prayer is not completely forgotten. So cases could be made for either one, right? You could make a case and say, look, but look what it does when you create a situation where people can just say the words and pray. People go in and it's just like, bah, 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 bah. They lose connection to the tefillah. They don't pay attention at all to what is they're saying. It's just words. They lose their enthusiasm about being able to pray, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. You could make that case. But the other case is, but tefillah could potentially be completely forgotten from the people. Because the reality is that people wouldn't be 3 days that people don't pray. It would be months and months and months that people don't pray. And then when they want to pray, they don't even know how to begin to do it. So that was the challenge. That was the issue. And we could be upset with how it is that they dealt with it, but that at the end of the day is how they dealt with it. So have a look. This is not just the Maharam Rottenberg, right? Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says here, first, what's familiar, right? What's familiar? Lo yitpalel b'makom sheyesh davar shemevatel kavanato. So at least he's posek the halacha that way. A person should not pray in a place that causes him to lose his kavanah. V'lo b'sha'ah mevatel et kavanato. It's not in a place and not in a time that causes a person to lose their kavanah. And then he says, Ve'achshav en anu nizharin bechol zeh. He says, but now we're not careful with any of it. Mipenei she'en anu mechavenim kol kach b'tefillah, because we don't really have such kavanah in the tefillah. You see, it's almost word for word the Maharam Rottenberg. En anu hazarin ata bechol zeh en anu mechavenim kol kach b'tefillah. So Maran, Rabbi Joseph Karo, is posek in Shulchan Aruch. And because of this halacha in the Shulchan Aruch is the reason why today people say, did you pray mincha? Is there a place I do have to go? Can I find the minyan for mincha and go to shul? Okay. Let's pray arbit. Yeah. That's not something that one can do if they're concerned about the halachot of the Talmud and Harambam. And so it's very important. So what I'm saying is, I want to be clear, right? What I'm saying is not that we shouldn't do that. It's the situation that all of Klal Yisrael is involved with now. And it's because it's a halacha mefuresh Shulchan Aruch. He said, we're not nizharin bechol zeh hayom. But like I said, that en anu nizharin bechol zeh, we're not careful with it, and we do it anyway, is not saying, I cannot stress this enough, so play close attention. It is not saying that Tefillah is now something else than what was described in the Talmud and the Rambam. No, Tefillah, kol Tefillah, she'en ba kavana, ina Tefillah. That's still the law. Any Tefillah that doesn't have kavanah is not a prayer. It can't be a prayer. Because the whole point of the prayer is to be able to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do we connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? With our mind. So if the mind is not there, it cannot be Tefillah. It requires the mind. What is he saying? En anu nizarin bechol zeh. He's saying even though under normal halacha, if we did not have kavanah, we would not pray. And if I did pray, I would have to pray again. Even though that's the original case, today we allow you to say the prayer words and to go through the prayer motions without the kavanah. We allow that isur, because remember, it was asur to do that. And that's what the Maharam Ranberg is saying. We're not careful about that anymore. We allow the isur of praying without kavanah. That's a huge thing to say because it's allowing a major prohibition, which could potentially be something that's an affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning an insult to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we hope the fact that everybody's doing it together, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts it. But that's what's different. Not Tefillah. Tefillah has not changed. Tefillah still requires kavanah. So what do we do instead? We do these practices, right? We practice Tefillah in the words and the behaviors and the motions and the standing and the sitting and the bowing and so on and so forth. So that maybe one day when we have kavanah, we can say Tefillah. But that doesn't mean that a person should not try to do everything that they can to actually pray, which is to have kavanah. Okay, because people think that there are levels of tefillah. The lowest level of tefillah is to pray and just understand the words, then pray with kavanah. No, tefillah without kavanah is not tefillah. It's just a practicing of the motions of tefillah. And that we're saying is good for people to do. So we want people to come to Bet Knesset. We want people to pray 3 times a day. We want people to say, go pray mincha, okay? Did you pray mincha yet? No, go pray mincha. We don't ask the person, is your mind okay? Are you calm and settled in your mind? Okay, go pray mincha. We don't do that. Whoever does that, nobody says that, right? But that's what should be. And the only reason it is not is because of what Maharam Rotenberg wrote, and Maran Posek Shulchan Aruch. And that's where we are today. That's ultimately what it is that's brought us to this. So what comes out of that? Again, to summarize, what comes out of that is proper tefillah that is considered to be tefillah is only with kavanah to live. And we've explained what kavanah to live is. And if a person does not have kavanah to live, today, as is explained in Shulchan Aruch, we allow them to go through the motion of tefillah anyway. We don't say there's asur to do so. Even though in Harambam and the Gemara it says asur, but today we don't say it's asur, and Maran allows it, and that's why what all of Klal Yisrael do, they all go through the motions of tefillah, even though they're not supposed to pray according to the Ikar halacha. And when we understand that, it's valuable for us to be able to, first of all, get what's going on, to understand this is what's happening. The majority of people are not praying. The majority of people are going through the motions of prayer, which is good. I mean, we could say, okay, so that's acceptable, going through the motions of prayer. Why is it good? Because that's what Klal Yisrael has accepted to do. But what we mustn't do is to think that it's actually prayer. Because if we do that, then we never actually get to real prayer. And it is important for anybody who's serious about prayer, about tefillah, to practice getting to a point of having kavanah really. And to be able to pray when a person can. So we see from the halachot, it's an obligation to pray once a day, but if you don't have the kavanah, it's better not to. So instead of not doing it, we do the motions, which we accept the psak of the Shulchan Aruch that tells us we can do the motions, but at any time that you are able to actually have tefillah, well, then that's a precious thing. You should do that as best you can. And what does that require? It requires a practice of kavanah. It requires a practice of being able to begin to control one's mind, which is not easy, but it's a good thing. Something a person should try to do, to control one's mind and to be able to have a koved rosh, right? Or yishuv, that's what I mean by yishuv hadat. Yishuv hadat is settled consciousness. And if a person is able to have settled consciousness and they're therefore able to pray and not be distracted by 15 things, it's something to strive for, something to get to. But without that, otherwise we're not considered praying. So that is really it that I wanted to kind of end with the series with, so we have a consciousness of it. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer the questions if there is. Yeah. Michal.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
And a thought. It's hard for me to believe that there was like a Tefilah utopia when everybody managed to have kavanah. I mean, even Harambam, when he established the halakha, was in some way, it's hard for me to believe that in his time, people were really all praying with kavanah, all tefillot of the day.
Yeah.
So why did Maharam of Rothenburg and also Shulchan Aruch consider it important to say, well, it's not forbidden to pray in this way? Like,
I'll tell you. So it's a very good question.
People would have, like in the times of the Rambam, people would have even continued praying and with the motion of praying with this precision, no?
So it's a very good question. What was different in the time of Harambam is this. First of all, there is a halakha that says, which we didn't see, that if a person had kavanah for the first 3 berachot of the Amidah, they can continue the rest of the Amidah. If they lose kavanah, what does that mean? It means they don't have to repeat the Amidah. Yeah? Because we saw that if a person prays without kavanah, he has to pray again. So there's a later halakha that says, but if the person said the first 3 berachot with kavanah, he doesn't have to pray again. Okay, so what does that mean? It meant that people at least did have kavanah for those 3 berachot, and the entire culture was to create the situation in which that was what it was that they were doing. But now you could say, Michal, maybe there were people in Harambam's place, in his city, or whatever it is, that they didn't have the kavanah at all. Okay, so we're not police. We're not going to go and we'll look at everybody and see whether they have kavanah or not kavanah. But if they came to ask halakha and said, Rabbeinu, I realized I said the Tefillah, I didn't have kavanah in the berachot. What should I do? In Harambam's time, I say you have to pray again with kavanah. That's what they would say. And it was the time in which people were much more open to not having the kavanah Tefillah. So you're right. What you're recognizing is what evolved into the time of Maran to be just people praying all the time. Because little by little, the world got more distracting and got more industrialized and got more, our world today is crazy compared to where they were. But from Harambam's time to Maran's time, there was still a huge development, right? Maran was in the 16th century. Harambam was in the 12th century. It was a completely different world. So things became more complex, more distracting, more faster, and so that had effect on people's capacity to be able to have a kavanah. So it's not that it was a utopia where everybody was having full kavanah the entire tefillah, not at all. But the standard was tefillah with kavanah, and people who didn't have that, either they did it anyway and they didn't listen to the halakha, or if they asked the Rab told them how they were supposed to be, or he said, Rab, I just came back from a trip, but my mind is not focused. Should I pray? No, don't. Wait. Nobody would say that today. You understand? And as a result of what the Maharam Rothenburg wrote and Maharam's Posel Shulchan Aruch, it's not even a question. Nobody says, I just traveled, I lost my luggage, I don't know where I'm going, I'm not finally settled in the hotel, should I pray Arbit? Nobody even asks, it's not a question. Of course you pray Arbit. What do you mean kind of thing? What kind of Jew are you? You pray Arbit. In the time of Harambam and those things, not even a thought that you would pray Arbit. Of course not. How could you pray Arbit? You just lost your luggage. You only settled in. It's 12 midnight. How are you supposed to pray? Do you understand the difference? It's the standard. What was the standard? Yeah. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Yes, Rob, I have two questions.
Yeah.
One question I have is, do you think it would be better to cut out some parts of the Tefillah in a minyan so that people don't get so distracted and they get to have a little bit of kavanah in certain part of the Tefillah, because it gets too tedious and too people get tired of being like 3 hours in Shabbat in the Bet Knesset, trying to pray and trying to concentrate themselves. So what do you think about cutting out certain parts of the Tefillah that they're not really part of what Rambam says that it should be part of the Tefillah?
So also a very good question. Although I think that question extends beyond Kavanah and Tefillah a little bit, right? Because I'm not sure that if you cut things out of the Tefillah, people are going to have Kavanah and the Tefillah anyway, right? It's a different thing. Kavanah and Tefillah is its own discipline. It requires practice. It requires an understanding of what kind of mindset am I supposed to get myself in, and so on and so forth. So do I encourage publicizing that? Yes, I encourage publicizing Kavanah and Tefillah and being able to get people to kind of commit to doing that more. With regards to cutting things out of the Tefillah, I think in my mind, it's a completely different issue. In my mind, that's a question of, should we dismantle the current structure of what we see as Tefillah so that people have more patience to be there or not? And I am not an advocate of that, unless we are doing it all as one Klal Yisrael and everybody's kind of deciding to. I'm not an advocate of that, because it's extremely dangerous to do so. Because once you start to unravel a tapestry, right, that people are used to, it's only a matter of time till the entire thing unravels. And that's why in the Gemara Sahim, it says, Davar shenehagu bo isur e'ata rashay lehatir b'fenehem, right? That's something that a group of people or a community of people have accepted as isur, right, as prohibited, meaning they know it's mutar from the halakha, but they've accepted it as though it's prohibited, and then it's come over time to just, they don't do it. The Gemara says, even if a hacham comes and says, no, you can do it, it's mutar, you're not allowed to do that in front of them. Why? Because there's something about a structure that for the general population, they don't differentiate between moving this, taking this away. Oh, you're taking that away. Why don't we take all of it away? Or why is this? They don't have a sense of the difference, for example, between the Amidah and I don't know, maybe a mizmor that we say for a chag or whatever it is. They don't see the difference in it. So even when I had to do this in COVID, I did this in COVID. I shortened the Tefilah of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? So we allowed ourselves to do that because of COVID, but, it's not a simple thing. So I'm not in general an advocate of doing that, because I think that there are other things that are very dangerous that we start to do when we start tampering with the motherboard. Do I think the Tefilah is too long? Yes. I think that it's much too long, and it was not set up for this day and age. And I think that we need to shorten it, but I think that we need to be able to be very careful as to how it's done, when it's done, by whom, right, and so on and so forth. So it's a very delicate issue in my opinion. And that was the first question. You say you have a second question?
Yes, I have a second question. I know that the Rami Rothenburg and the Shulchan Aruch, they made this statement or this halakha because of a necessity they saw in the society. But I think that they are a little bit exempting the people of making an effort to get kavanah in the tefillah. I know it's a process, but I also think that when you get to pronounce the words and make it like a motion, you get used to it and you don't really make an effort to get Kavanah in the Tefillah. So it's like it's difficult. I don't know. So what do you think about?
Yeah, that's the other side of the argument. In other words, the other side of the argument is, but look what happens, right? If you do this. So I hear that side of the argument. And if you would have asked me when I was 25 years old or 30 years old, I would have been 100% insisting that that's, but I'm older and I will admit that I recognize the loss of it. I do. What you're saying, I recognize that. But I also recognize the value of having an external structure that without which things might very well be much worse off. And what I mean by that is sometimes the external structures that even we see and we get upset about and we get nervous about because it's not the real thing, right? But there is something that the structure does, and that in my opinion is that it holds the kernels, right, the seeds of an approach or a way of avodah that otherwise would be blown away by the wind. So it's not so cut and dry. And there are definitely arguments on the other side. And I know the arguments and I used to fight the arguments. I still do, right? I mean, I wouldn't be giving the shiur this way if I didn't believe that that's what we really should be doing. But I recognize what their thinking was. And I have greater understanding as I get older of what their thinking was. Even though I recognize what we've lost as a result of that, right? We've lost a great deal of what Tefillah is meant to be. But it is very likely and possible that if they had not done that, we would just not have it. And that's not so sure that would have been a good thing. Yeah. So I answer all of that with a question mark. You know, I'm not sure about any of it, but I see the different sides of it. And I have understanding better of it. Yeah. Okay, so if it's okay, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to step away now because I have to get to a shiur. It's an hour away now, so I have to get ready to go. But I very much thank you for the opportunity to spend this time in the Divrei Torah with you. And I hope that it was helpful and supportive. And please God, maybe we'll do more different series in the future. What I would like to ask, if possible, if there's recordings of them, maybe you can send me the recordings. It would be helpful. But I wish everybody the very, very, very best. And thank you very much for having me. And continued Hatzlachat to Ibn Sfarad and everybody that's working to make it successful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It was such an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you.
And we hope to have you here with us another time. And the recordings are already in YouTube in the events page.
Okay,
so
I'll check that.
I'll send them to you.
Very good.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.